Claire sat on the porch swing of the old house on Maple Street, sipping chamomile tea from her grandmother's chipped blue mug, unaware that this spring might be her last in the home that raised her. The porch creaked under the rhythm of her feet. A breeze carried the faint scent of lilac from Mrs. Peterson's garden across the street, blending with the cinnamon from Grandma June's morning bacon. Claire curled her fingers around the warm ceramic, letting its familiar heat steady her as she watched cherry blossoms flutter to the ground like pink snowflakes. In the distance, someone was tuning a saxophone for the upcoming Cherry Blossom Festival, another sign spring had officially arrived in Willow Creek. Earlier that week, Grandma June had asked, almost casually, if Claire had ever thought about where she might live. One day, Claire brushed it off then, thinking it was just another one of June's gentle nudges toward independence. But now, with the blossoms falling and the festival approaching, the question sat heavier in her chest. Inside, the kitchen bustled. Grandma June moved about with her quiet efficiency, folding napkins, preparing dough, wiping counters no one had touched. Claire watched her through the screen door, noting the ritual of it all. This wasn't just a home, it was a living archive of birthdays, snow days, pies cooling on windowsills, nights with thunder and power outages lit by candles and stories. The family would be arriving later today. Aaron's engagement party had been hastily planned, squeezing itself between wedding dress fittings and floral arrangements. Claire had offered to bake cherry hand pies for the gathering. It felt symbolic, but her mother said catering would feel more elegant. Aaron, as always, agreed. The sound of tires on gravel signaled the first arrival. Claire's parents stepped out of their silver SUV, Helen balancing a garment bag and David juggling a box of wine glasses. They smiled briefly at Claire, then disappeared inside. Not long after, Aaron's voice cut through the spring air like a whistle, chirpy, commanding, full of, "We're on a schedule." Claire slipped off the porch and headed into the house. The kitchen, once a sanctuary of stillness, had turned into a logistical command center. Lists on the fridge, candles on the counter, a Bluetooth speaker playing a trendy playlist that clashed with the soft piano tunes June usually kept on the radio. At the dining table, Erin scrolled through her phone while Helen arranged linen napkins into elaborate folds. David stood near the window, speaking into his earpiece, giving directions to someone about delivery times. "Claire, could you help Grandma June upstairs for a bit?" Helen asked, barely looking up. "We just need the downstairs to look streamlined." June, standing just a few feet away, wiped her hands on a dish towel and raised an eyebrow. "I can manage my own legs, thank you," she said calmly. Claire offered her a small smile and stepped aside to give her grandmother space. June walked slowly into the living room, muttering something about people rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. The afternoon wore on. More relatives arrived. There were hugs, kisses, bottles of wine, loud declarations of "can't believe how big you've gotten," as if Claire had been 8 and invisible for the past 15 years. She busied herself in the corner of the kitchen, arranging cups for tea that no one would likely drink. Aaron's fiancé, a tall man with a polished smile Claire couldn't quite remember the name of, made a toast about new beginnings. Someone clapped. Claire didn't. It was only when Helen called for everyone's attention that Claire realized something bigger was coming. "We have some exciting news," Helen said, her voice warm, eyes sparkling with just enough rehearsed emotion. "As part of Aaron's wedding gift, David and I have made a generous decision for the family." Claire froze mid-pour. "We've sold the Maple Street house," Helen continued. "The funds will go toward Aaron and Adam's dream wedding, and of course their down payment on a new home." Claire didn't speak. She couldn't. David chimed in, "It's a good time to sell. Market's high, and Aaron's wedding venue isn't cheap." Around them, family members nodded approvingly, murmuring things like "smart move" and "well-deserved." Claire looked at Grandma June, who remained expressionless, eyes fixed on the teacup in her hands. No one seemed to notice that she hadn't nodded, hadn't smiled, hadn't said a word. Helen moved closer, placing a hand on Claire's shoulder. "You're 23, Claire. It's time to move on with your life. Let Erin have her moment. It's for the family." Claire didn't hear the rest. The hum of voices blurred. The cinnamon in the air turned sharp, bitter. Her hands trembled as she set the teacup down and quietly walked back to the kitchen. The porcelain clicked against the counter louder than she expected. June followed soon after, footsteps slow, deliberate. Claire stood at the sink, staring into the empty cup, willing herself not to cry. "What does home mean to you, sweetheart?" June asked gently. Claire turned her head, but said nothing. The question didn't need an answer, not yet. "You're lucky," Aaron laughed. "You get to be part of something special, even if it's not yours." Claire stood near the doorway of the dining room, clutching a linen napkin she'd been folding and unfolding for the past 5 minutes. The brunch had begun nearly an hour ago, and already it felt like she'd been transported into someone else's life, the kind where everything sparkled, silverware, champagne flutes, Aaron's engagement ring, and nothing fit quite right. Especially not her. The long oak table, once used for quiet family dinners and jigsaw puzzles on rainy days, had been dressed in ivory linens and pink floral centerpieces. Laughter bounced off the walls. Erin's voice, bright and nonstop, filled the room as she held up one of the wedding invitations. Imported paper, letterpress, took 3 weeks to design, but it's worth it, right? I mean, you only get married once. Hopefully, someone chuckled. Claire forced a smile as a tray of croissants was passed down the table. No one noticed she hadn't taken one. She glanced toward the kitchen, hoping to excuse herself, but her mother intercepted her gaze with a quick shake of the head. "Stay." The doorbell rang, drawing everyone's attention. Claire excused herself quickly, too quickly, and stepped into the entryway. It was Frankie, holding a white pastry box tied with a pale pink ribbon. "Did I make it in time?" he asked, smiling warmly. His graying beard and flour-dusted apron made him look out of place amid the sleek cars and sharp suits outside. Claire blinked, surprised. "You didn't have to—" "I know, but I figured cherry pies might taste better than whatever caviar toast they're pushing in there." He handed her the box, and she caught the scent of sugar and lemon zest. She hesitated. "They might not want—" He winked. "They're not for them, they're for you. I'll see you Monday, all right?" She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, and watched him walk back toward his pickup truck. When she returned, Erin had taken center stage again, waving her phone. "Okay, everyone, look, here's the venue. That's where the ceremony will be, under that giant oak tree. And this is the reception hall. French doors, chandeliers, the whole works." Claire quietly slipped the box onto the kitchen counter and moved to set out coffee cups. As she poured, her mother appeared beside her. "Claire," Helen said gently, "it might be time for you to think about the next step. Maybe an apartment, maybe school again, something appropriate." Claire turned, eyebrows lifting. "Appropriate?" Helen offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Something that fits where you're at right now. You've been here long enough. You need to make space for the future." Claire didn't respond. She couldn't find the words. She only heard the echo of Erin's laughter from the next room. After the last plate was cleared, Claire retreated to the pantry to get air. Not outside, but somewhere quiet, somewhere no one had filled with floral arrangements and speeches. She leaned against the wooden shelves, letting the familiar scent of dried rosemary and vanilla lull her thoughts. The pantry had been June's favorite place for thinking. It still had her handwriting on the spice jars, curling labels that said cloves and ground cinnamon in faded ink. Voices filtered in from the hallway. "She doesn't know," David whispered. "She still thinks she owns the house. We need to move quickly." "She'll be fine once she's in assisted living," Helen replied. "Claire, too, this house is too much for them. They'll adjust." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. Later that evening, she found June in the den, folding tea towels as the sun dipped behind the cherry trees outside. The soft light turned the room golden, like a faded photograph. Claire sat beside her, unable to hide the storm inside. "They're moving you," she said. "They didn't even tell you." June's hand stilled. She looked up, her gaze steady. "I'm not surprised," she said. "They don't see the house the way we do." Claire blinked. "Why didn't you say something?" June smiled faintly and picked up another towel. "Sometimes silence is the sharpest answer, and sometimes people tell you exactly who they are if you let them talk long enough." Claire felt the lump in her throat grow heavier. What are you going to do? June folded the last towel and set it down. She reached for her cane, slowly standing. There's something I need you to find. In the attic. But not yet. Claire looked up, confused. Some drawers don't open until the right time, June said softly. Claire opened her mouth to ask more, but the doorbell rang again. Aaron's voice called out, something about the florist being early. June turned to Claire, her eyes unusually tired. Help me to the kitchen, will you? They walked slowly, arm in arm, through the hallway lined with family pictures, Aaron in dance recitals, Claire in homemade Halloween costumes, a photo of June, young and bright-eyed, holding a cherry pie with pride. They reached the kitchen, and June settled into her favorite chair near the window. Claire poured her a cup of tea, stirring gently. I'm sorry, Claire whispered. June took a sip, then set the cup down carefully. Her voice was calm, certain. I can manage my own legs, thank you. Before sunrise, Claire found herself kneeling on the attic floor, guided only by her grandmother's words and the soft creak of old wood beneath her hands. The house was still asleep. Downstairs, the kitchen sat in silence, the air heavy with the scent of yesterday's coffee and something older, cedar perhaps, or time itself. Claire had tiptoed past her parents' bedroom, careful not to wake anyone, clutching a flashlight and her grandmother's cryptic message. Some drawers don't open until the right time. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, only that it was time. The attic welcomed her with cool air and the quiet comfort of clutter. Old trunks lined the edges like sentinels guarding memory. A yellowed map of Vermont, boxes of holiday decorations, and Claire's childhood rocking horse all sat untouched beneath a thin layer of dust. She moved slowly, almost reverently, toward the far corner where June had once kept her sewing basket. The floor creaked gently beneath her knees as she reached for the lowest drawer in the built-in shelf. Her fingers ran along the edge. There, a faint notch. She pressed it, a quiet click. Inside, wrapped in wax paper and tied with twine, was a brown envelope with her name in June's tidy script. Claire, when they forget what matters. She held it in her hands for a long moment before untying the string. Inside were two items, a notarized deed showing June as the sole legal owner of the Maple Street house, and a second document, unsigned, titled Intent to Transfer Ownership. It was dated weeks ago. Claire's heart pounded as she read the legal language. The house hadn't been sold, not legally. The sale Aaron had toasted to was nothing more than a plan, one that never included June's actual consent. Downstairs, a floorboard groaned. She tucked the papers back into the envelope and slid it under her sweater. By the time she descended the attic steps, the sun had begun to break across the horizon, streaking the hallway with gold. Claire made her way to the kitchen where the kettle was already steaming. June sat at the table, back straight, eyes on the window. Without a word, Claire placed the envelope in front of her. June didn't reach for it. She simply said, I wondered when you'd find it. Claire pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Why didn't you stop them? June exhaled through her nose, a quiet, almost laugh. They were so sure I'd forgotten how things work. Let them believe it. It told me everything I needed to know. You never signed the transfer. No, June said. I wanted to see if they'd ask. They didn't. Claire's throat felt dry. They said they're moving you. I'm aware. The front door creaked open, followed by the sound of a familiar voice. Mrs. Chen? Miss Bennett? Came the deep baritone of Mr. Dalton, the family attorney. Claire and June exchanged a glance before June called, Kitchen Hal. He entered with a briefcase and the usual bow tie that made him look more like a retired professor than a lawyer. He nodded politely at Claire. Morning, I hope I'm not too early. June gestured to the seat beside her. Perfect timing. Mr. Dalton opened the case and took out a manila folder. Everything's in order. The original deed, the updated will, and your letter, as discussed. Claire blinked. Letter? June reached into the folder and pulled out a crisp envelope sealed in red wax. This is for the reading. It explains everything, and this, she said, turning to Claire, is your copy of the deed. You'll keep it safe. Claire accepted it with trembling hands. They won't like this. No, June agreed. But this house isn't a wedding gift. It's a legacy. It's where you became yourself. Footsteps upstairs signaled someone stirring. Claire quickly slid the documents into a folder and tucked it beneath the bread bin. Later that morning, as Aaron buzzed about the flower arrangements and Helen gave orders to the cleaning crew, Claire retreated to the backyard with a rake in hand. She needed to feel grounded, to hear the scrape of metal against soil. Beside the garden fence, little Ellie from next door peeked through a gap in the wood. "Hi," she whispered. Claire smiled. "Mornin'. Were you up in the attic?" Ellie asked, her eyes wide. Claire tilted her head. "How'd you know?" "I saw your light," Ellie said. "That's where the stories live, right?" Claire blinked, caught off guard. Then, slowly, she smiled. "Yeah, that's right." She offered Ellie a daffodil from the garden bed. The little girl beamed, then ran off barefoot across her lawn. Back inside, Claire returned to the kitchen. June had already cleared the table and was kneading dough. The radio played soft jazz. Outside, the wind lifted fallen petals from the cherry trees. June looked up and said nothing. She simply nodded once, as if everything had finally clicked into place. Claire opened the kitchen window for fresh air. Across the street, Ellie waved and pointed to the attic, mouthing, "That's where the stories live, right?" "You always were her favorite," Erin said sharply, her eyes darting between Claire and the deed in her hands. "But that doesn't mean you deserve it." Claire stood by the kitchen sink, hands damp from washing dishes she hadn't used, heart thudding as if it had lost its rhythm. The paper in Erin's hand crinkled slightly, the official seal catching a glint of sunlight through the window. It was the same paper Claire had hoped to keep tucked away, at least for a little longer. But secrets never stayed folded for long in a house this full. The morning had started with quiet. June had requested simple toast and black tea, no sugar. She'd sat in her usual chair by the window, wrapped in her cardigan, watching the light settle on the cherry blossoms outside. Claire had made the tea stronger than usual, remembering the words from last night. Erin, on the other hand, had arrived just before noon, in a rush of perfume and pointed questions. Helen trailed behind, holding a list of things that still needed to be finalized for the wedding. The house, once again, had been reduced to a background prop in their story. Claire hadn't meant to let the folder fall open. She'd been searching for a recipe June had stashed years ago, apple walnut bread, Erin's favorite, and the folder tucked beneath it had slid out. The deed had landed at Erin's feet like a dropped curtain at the end of a show. Helen stood near the stove, her hands clenched tightly, as if they were trying to hold back the moment itself. "Is this real?" she asked. "Mother? Did you really keep this from us?" June, sitting calmly in her chair, looked up with a face like Riverstone, smooth, unshaken. "Yes." "But why?" Erin snapped, waving the paper. "We already started escrow. The venue deposit—" Claire stepped forward. "You started all of that without even asking her." Erin turned on her, eyes narrow. "What would you even do with this house, Claire? Bake pies? Sell cookies from the porch? This place isn't a fairy tale. It's real estate." "It's home," Claire replied, her voice low but firm. Helen stepped between them, trying to gather her composure. "Sweetheart," she said, turning to Claire, "you're good at what you do, but you need to be practical. Erin's building something big. This is about investing in the family's future." Claire didn't flinch. "So am I." The room fell into a strange silence, one only broken by the soft clink of June's spoon stirring her tea. June finally spoke. "Erin, I didn't give Claire the house because she asked for it. I gave it to her because she never did." Erin's lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. Helen reached for her daughter's arm, pulling her gently back, like a curtain from a stage she was no longer welcome on. They left soon after, not with slamming doors or shouted protests, but with stiff goodbyes and the quiet rage of people unused to hearing no. Claire stood at the kitchen counter long after they'd gone, unsure whether she had won something or lost everything. She wiped the surface clean with slow, deliberate movements, the same way June always did after kneading dough, gentle but thorough, like tending to something sacred. From behind her, the shuffle of slippers. "I made a mess," June said softly. Claire turned, startled. "What?" June gestured to the tea, the tension, the storm that had passed. That wasn't the plan, not exactly. Claire smiled, faint and tired. They'll be fine. They'll adjust, June replied. Or they won't. Either way, the truth is out now. There was a long pause, the kind that filled a room without needing sound. Then June reached into the folds of her cardigan and pulled out a smaller envelope, yellowed at the edges, sealed with a plain white sticker. This is for later, she said. Open it when I'm gone. Claire shook her head. Don't talk like that. June gave her a look. Not sad, not dramatic, just steady. Everyone goes somewhere eventually, sweetheart. The trick is preparing for the journey. Claire didn't argue. She simply took the envelope, holding it with both hands, like something delicate. That night the house was oddly still. The wind had shifted, warm and slow, carrying the scent of cherry blossoms through the screen door. Claire moved from room to room without turning on the lights, letting the shadows speak their soft language. On the porch, she found June sitting alone, a blanket wrapped around her knees. The stars were just beginning to show. Tomorrow, June said, not looking at her, the sun returns. Make sure the tea is strong. The sun rose quietly over Willow Creek, but Claire's house stayed dim. The tea never got made. The silence in the kitchen was the kind that felt hollow, like the air had forgotten how to carry sound. The chair by the window sat empty, a folded cardigan resting neatly over its back. The old radio, still tuned to the AM station June loved, crackled softly, but Claire didn't turn it off. She sat at the table, her hands wrapped around an untouched mug, her eyes fixed on the chair that had always seemed so full of life. By mid-morning, the calls began. Helen's voice on the line was subdued, polite, and distant. Arrangements, she said, logistics, the funeral home, the flowers. Erin would be flying back early from her bachelorette trip. Mr. Dalton would handle the legal details. Claire agreed to everything without protest. She moved through the motions, answering questions, confirming times, nodding even when no one could see. But her heart felt wrapped in cotton, numb, not yet broken, as if waiting for permission to grieve. The service was held 3 days later in the town's small funeral parlor, a place that still smelled faintly of beeswax and cedar. Quilted chairs lined the narrow aisles, and a table near the entrance held framed photographs. June as a young woman in a polka dot dress, June holding a baby Claire in the backyard, June laughing with flour on her nose. Claire stood by the table, running her fingers lightly over the photo frames. People came and went, offering soft condolences and awkward smiles. Some brought flowers, others brought pie, because it felt right, they said. June would have liked that. Frankie arrived just before the service began, holding a box of cherry hand pies wrapped in a gingham cloth. For after, he said simply, placing them beside the guest book. Claire nodded, unable to speak, and squeezed his hand in thanks. When the chairs had filled and the murmurs faded, Mr. Dalton stepped forward. He cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses with a familiar flick of the wrist. June Bennett left specific instructions for today, he began, his voice steady but warm. She asked that I read this letter aloud before we proceed with any formal matters. He opened a crisp envelope and unfolded a sheet of stationery. The paper trembled slightly in his hands. If you're seeing this, he read, it means I've made peace, and I hope you have too. The room stilled. Even the creak of the radiator seemed to hold its breath. I've spent my life in this town, in this house, and in this kitchen. I've watched birthdays, heartbreaks, burnt crusts, and perfect pies. And through it all, I've learned that what matters most isn't what you build. It's who you build it with. Claire closed her eyes. To my daughter Helen, the letter continued, I leave the silver tea set. You never did like my chip mugs, and this way, you'll have something polished to remember me by. To my granddaughter Erin, I leave my first cookbook. May you learn that not all ingredients are listed on the page. A few heads turned toward Erin, who sat stiffly beside her mother, eyes fixed on the floor. And to Claire, Dalton paused, voice gentling, I leave the house on Maple Street, the bakery rights, the garden, the pantry with its old jars and secret compartments, not because she asked for it, but because she honored it. A low murmur swept through the room. Helen looked as though she might speak, but Mr. Dalton raised a hand. June's will is notarized and legally binding. All necessary documents are filed and sealed. This is not open for debate. Claire felt the breath return to her lungs in slow, shaky waves. She wasn't sure if she was crying or if it was just the light shifting through the stained glass windows. After the service, as the chairs were folded and the guests filtered out, Claire remained behind. Mr. Dalton handed her a manila folder. She wanted you to have this now, he said. You'll find the full deed, the bakery permits, and a few notes. Claire thanked him quietly. He left her alone in the room where the scent of lilies still hung thick in the air. Back at the house, Claire sat at the kitchen table, the folder unopened beside her. The light through the window had turned a warmer shade, casting soft shadows on the countertop. She reached for the smaller envelope June had given her days ago, the one she wasn't meant to open until now. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a hand-drawn map of the house, the pantry, the attic, the garden, each space labeled with little hearts and notes in June's delicate handwriting. One corner had been circled just behind the pantry wall. Next to it, in faded ink, Claire's corner, yours to reimagine. Claire stood slowly, moving to the old pantry. She ran her hand along the wooden paneling until she found a small notch. A gentle push revealed a narrow alcove, just big enough for a counter, a stool, a shelf lined with old recipes. The space smelled faintly of nutmeg and lemon. She stepped back, heart beating differently now. Not heavy, but wide open. Outside, the breeze rustled the cherry blossoms. Across the street, Ellie stood with her mother, holding a drawing in her hands. Claire opened the door. "Hi, Miss Claire," the girl said. "This is for you." It was a card, drawn in crayon. A smiling house, a tree with pink flowers, and inside, a stick figure in an apron holding a pie. "Thank you for the cookies," it read in large, careful letters. Claire knelt and hugged the girl gently. "You're welcome, sweetheart." As they left, she glanced back at the kitchen, at the pantry, at the quiet that now felt like a beginning. She walked out to the garden, brushed her hand across the lavender, and whispered, "I'll keep it going, Grandma. I promise." 6 months later, Willow Creek's cherry blossoms bloomed again, but this time under a new sign that read, "Claire's Corner, Pies, Tea, and Quiet Joys." The bakery opened its doors just after dawn. Sunlight stretched lazily across Maple Street, spilling through the wide windows Claire had scrubbed herself, revealing hand-painted shelves stocked with jars of lemon curd, tins of tea leaves, and rows of fresh pies that filled the space with a buttery warmth. A tiny bell above the door chimed every time someone stepped inside, and today it rang often. Claire moved behind the counter with an ease that had taken root slowly, like sourdough starter left to rise in its own time. She wore her grandmother's old apron, the faded embroidery, Bennett Bakes since 1952 stitched across the top. The scent of cinnamon and clove swirled around her, grounding her more than any speech or ceremony ever could. "Do you think the dough is breathing enough?" Ellie asked, standing on a wooden step stool beside her. The 8-year-old's brows were furrowed with earnest concern as she peered into a mixing bowl. Claire smiled. "Looks like it's breathing just fine. Let's give it a minute more." Ellie nodded solemnly as though she were preparing to perform surgery. Claire turned to check on the pies in the oven while the girl traced imaginary designs across the flowered counter. Outside, the town square buzzed with the gentle commotion of the Cherry Blossom Festival. Market stalls had sprung up like mushrooms overnight, selling everything from hand-knit scarves to homemade preserves. Claire's bakery, nestled just off the corner of Main and Maple, had become a natural stop for festival goers, especially the older ones, who remembered June's baking and said with misty eyes, "You've got her hands, you know, same way she held a knife." Frankie stopped in around mid-morning, holding a bouquet of spring flowers and a box of bagels. "Thought you might need some breakfast," he said, setting them on the counter. Claire hugged him lightly. "You keep feeding me, I'll have to rename the place Frankie's Fridge." "Eh?" He grinned. "Claire's Corner has a nicer ring to it." He turned to Ellie. "You been keeping this one in line?" Ellie nodded seriously. "She lets me lick the spoon." "Ah," he said, mock stern. "That's an advanced privilege. Don't waste it." The morning passed in the rhythm of warm chatter, clinking teacups, and the low hum of jazz from an old record player June had once kept in the pantry. Claire had restored it with the help of a local handyman, and it now played softly from a shelf near the window, a subtle tether to the past. Just after noon, the bell rang again. Claire looked up from arranging shortbread cookies and froze. Erin stood in the doorway holding a small photo frame and looking unsure of herself for the first time Claire could remember. Her coat was too formal for the occasion, her heels too sharp for the cobbled sidewalk, but her face, it had softened. "I was at Mom's," she said, stepping forward. "She's still, well, Mom." Claire waited, not offering anything. Erin reached into her bag and pulled out a wedding photo, her and Adam, standing beneath a large oak tree, sunlight catching on her veil. "I thought you might want this," Erin said, placing it gently on the counter. "I wasn't always kind." Claire looked down at the photo, then back at Erin. "No," she said quietly. "You weren't." They stood in silence for a moment. Outside, children laughed as bubbles drifted into the air. "But you showed up," Claire added, "and that counts for something." Erin gave a half smile. "The pies smell amazing." "They are," Ellie piped in proudly. "We don't burn anything anymore." Erin smiled at the girl, then back at Claire. "Well, I should go." Claire hesitated, then pointed to a small gallery wall near the bakery's entrance. "There's space next to Grandma's photo. You can hang it there if you'd like." Erin blinked, surprised. "Are you sure?" Claire nodded. "It's part of the story, isn't it?" By late afternoon, the bakery began to wind down. The shelves were mostly bare, the air filled with the lingering scent of vanilla and orange zest. Ellie helped wash bowls at the sink, humming a tune Claire couldn't quite place. Claire moved to the front window and placed a new pie on the display shelf. It was cherry, just like the ones June used to make for spring, with a braided crust and sugar crystals that shimmered in the sunlight. The warm scent drifted through the screen door and into the breeze, mingling with the blossoms outside. Ellie appeared beside her, drying her hands on her apron. "I want to bake forever," she said. Claire turned, looking down at the girl's flour-smudged face, her eyes wide with that kind of wonder only children have. She reached out, brushing a bit of flour from Ellie's cheek. "So do I, kid. So do I." Even the softest hands can shape a legacy, one pie crust and kind gesture at a time. Claire didn't ask for praise or fight for recognition. She simply stayed true to what felt right, and the house, the town, and even the people who once overlooked her began to see her differently. When we stop measuring worth by ambition or appearance, we make room for the kind of goodness that can't be taught, only shown. Like a porch light left on through a storm, quiet kindness has a way of guiding others home. So perhaps today, look a little closer. There might be a Claire on your street, a quiet soul with a full heart, waiting to be seen, not judged.